All right, welcome everybody. It's that time again, time for another one of our live webinars. Mike Hamilton here. I will be your host for today. And we do have a special one. Today we have Ray Davis with us, senior technical writer with Alcon. I've known Ray for a bit of time now. He's been at a few Mad Worlds, done a few of our webinars before. Great resource for us to have. However, before we dive into the webinar, I do have just a couple of housekeeping items to cover. Before anybody asks, yes, this webinar will be recorded. And just by being an attendee, you will be receiving an email with a link to the recording once it is available. The other housekeeping item, with the sheer number of attendees we're expecting here, we have everybody on mute. That's just to protect your privacy. But as part of this webinar software, there is a dedicated questions and answers panel. So feel free to type a question into that Q&A panel at any time. I will be kind of curating those questions as they come in, and I'll be bringing those up to Ray at the end when we get into the question and answer portion. All righty. I believe that takes care of all of our housekeeping. It's out of the way. And I will go ahead and turn the microphone over to our esteemed guest, Mr. Ray Davis.
All right, thanks, Mike, for that introduction. I really appreciate that. Some really kind things to say, really setting the bar high for me today. Just to tell you a little bit more about myself, I'm a graduate of the Texas Tech University Technical Communication Program. So if any of you out there are from TTU, definitely mention it in the questions panel so I can say hi. I've been a technical writer for almost 25 years. While also doing some time as a software engineer and a technical writing manager. I'll be talking about that just a little bit today as well. The bulk of my experience is in the medical and healthcare domain. Of that 25 years, about 20 of it is in the healthcare domain. So I've gotten pretty familiar with some of the regulations around technical writing for medical devices. I also want to set some expectations right up front. This presentation is going to be less about tips and tricks for using Flare. And it's going to be more about how we used Flare to support a process. The audience for this is certainly anyone who uses Flare, and especially in any kind of environment where constant improvement is an expectation. But again, it's going to be less about which buttons to press and more about how the tool supports a process. I also want to say that earlier this year I changed jobs. So this presentation was proposed and written while I worked at my former employee. I currently work at Alcon. That's what my bio and the summary for this presentation says. But this presentation is based on my experience with another company. So I just want to be upfront about that. Okay, this is the art and science of rapid prototyping with MadCap Flare, and I'm Ray Davis. Let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start with what seems like a non sequitur. As a medical device manufacturer, there are a lot of notified bodies that you have to satisfy if you want to sell your medical device, not just in the US, but also in the European Union, Brazil, Canada, most any country in the world. I'm not a regulatory expert, so in this quick explanation, I'm going to be focusing on the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration here in the US. Whatever you might think about the FDA today, their goal, their mission, their relationship with you, the consumer, and you, the medical device manufacturer, can be summed up like this. Making sure that my product, my medical device, my drug, whatever, is safe and effective. What does safe and effective mean? Basically, that the product won't hurt you, and it does what I say it will do. It does what I claim. I put claim in air quotes here, because claim is a bit of a loaded word. It's the specific thing that I say my therapy does. If I claim that my therapy will make you taller, I have to have documented research, tests, studies, that sort of thing that back this up. My labeling can only say that my therapy will make you taller. I can only sell my product according to what I claim, that it will make you taller. I can't sell my product promising that it'll make you more handsome because I'm only claiming that it will make you taller, and I've proven that it will do that. The FDA can show up at my site at any time, announced or unannounced, and perform an inspection. It's usually announced. If you're a manufacturer with no history of findings or issues, they might give you a couple of weeks of heads up. But if you've had quality issues in the past, they can also show up with no notice. They can just walk in with no notice regardless. They can just walk in the front door and effectively say, "We'd like to see the manager," and pretty much you have to comply. What they're doing there, they want you to prove that you're in control of your processes, that you're in control of the changes that you're making, that what you're doing is intentional. The way you do that is with documentation, not necessarily what we as technical writers think of as documentation. Yes, manuals, yes, SOPs, but also just evidence of testing, proof that you didn't fall backwards into your results and that you did it intentionally. They're going to be asking questions, and the answers need to come in the form of paperwork printed from your system of record. Inspections are a big deal. Everyone can get pretty torqued up around inspection time. Good inspections make future inspections less difficult. Poor inspections make you interesting to the FDA, and they're going to come back a lot. And so you want things to go well. You don't want to be interesting to the FDA. The FDA is also one of those organizations that if they're not happy with the answers that you give, or that you're not making your product in a way that demonstrates that you're in control, they can put a bicycle lock on the front door and you are closed until they are happy. What happens during an inspection? So this example that I'm going to talk about here, it assumes that it's an announced inspection, that you've had a couple of days or even a couple of weeks to prepare. The inspectors from the notified body, they arrive at your location and they're going to be greeted by leadership at the front door. You don't want them standing around in the lobby waiting. You want them to know that they are a priority. Often you're going to start with a facility tour. So the leadership is going to show the inspectors around the facility. This is where the engineers sit. This is a lab where we test products. This is where we hold finished goods. If it's an announced inspection, leadership is going to have announced to the facility that the inspection is going to be on this date. You're not preparing here. You want to always be ready for an inspection. But what they're doing is they're reminding folks things like clean desk policy, no unattended papers on your desk, which is going to be really hard for some folks, myself included sometimes. And this also includes things like sticky notes on your monitor or even things that you might have on your whiteboard. All of your machines should be locked if you're not in front of them. Doors should be closed if possible. And you really want to keep that water cooler chit chat to a minimum. You don't want to be getting a cup of coffee with your teammate, talking about the testing that you heard about on a new product and have the inspector walk by and find what you're saying to be interesting. Remember what I said about being interesting. You don't want to be. And then suddenly you're the GOAT. And I don't mean that in the more recent definition of greatest of all time, maybe greatest blunder by a tech writer of all time, but you get the idea. You don't want to be the GOAT. Anything an inspector sees or hears is subject to inspection, and they can ask questions about it. Often leadership is going to walk the area that they're responsible for, looking for things that the inspector might find interesting. I've done this in the past as a technical writing manager. All this is to say that management should and does take inspections and inspection readiness very seriously. The inspectors, they're going to be shown to a front room, and this is a specially prepared front room. It's close to restrooms so that exposure to other locations, other sights and sounds is minimized. Lunches are going to be catered, again, to minimize distractions, but also to prevent inspectors from roaming around and seeing things that they might want to ask questions about. The goal here, the goal of any inspection, again, is to demonstrate that you are in control of the changes that you're making. In the front room, you're usually going to have one or two people who are the spokespersons. This is usually a business leader, so a site leader, a division VP, someone like that, and a quality leader, big Q, quality, the quality department. You're going to have a senior SME for whatever is being discussed. And when I say senior, I mean someone who's been with the company for a while. They're going to have they're going to be high enough up on the food chain that they have a good worldview of the product or the product family, but they're also maybe not going to have some of the nitty-gritty in the field experience. What you don't want here is someone who's going to get bogged down in the nuance. This is usually also someone who is some sort of high-level manager. If the discussion is about a mechanical system, the SME might be an engineering manager who manages a department of 10 or 20 engineers. And then the last person that's going to be in the front room is a scribe. And the scribe is someone who's communicating with the back room over instant messenger. What questions are being asked? Where might this line of questioning be going? As an example, they're asking about batteries. What other systems use these specific batteries that they're asking about? And they're going to be communicating what's the general demeanor of the inspectors? What's the temperature in the room? How's it going? That sort of thing. The goals of the front room, they're to isolate the inspectors from chaos and to present evidence of the things that are being asked about. In the back room, preparation is going to have started days or even weeks ago. You're going to have printers and a lot of them. You're going to have a lot of paper, and you're going to have these lines of communication. And then you're also going to have SMEs who are on reserve. So these are domain experts that can answer very specific questions about a product. Why did you use this font for this type of information in a document, as an example? There might be a very legitimate reason why for that. And it could be quality requirements, it could be accessibility requirements, it could be consistency requirements and needs. A manager might not have that information, but a domain SME will have the complete history on that decision in painful nuance. That's where you want that information to be, is in the back room. I've been one of these SMEs in the past. You're expected to be available during business hours, later, often, and ready to answer questions as soon as possible. And the answers need to be concise. They don't necessarily need the history. They just need a very concise piece of information that they can communicate. The inspection takes priority over any other business. Even a customer situation down can probably be handled by one of your teammates, and you're going to be expected to delegate that authority. The back room is printing evidence of that control that we were talking about. And that control comes in the form of test protocols and results, release documentation, that sort of thing. Again, all of this comes from the system record. They bring that evidence in printed form to the front room in a quiet and very no-nonsense way, and then they disappear. The goal of the back room is to make the front room look good, to make it look like they have all the answers right at their fingertips. Okay, so that's just a little scratch of the surface of what an FDA inspection looks like. Again, full disclosure, I've never been in the front room. Like I said, the goal of the front room is to isolate the inspector from chaos. You want to limit the number of people in the front room. I've been an SME on reserve, but I've never been in the front room. The goal of everybody in the front room or the back room should be to ensure that a safe and effective product is being produced, and to demonstrate that, to be able to demonstrate that. So in the front room, they're responding to direct questions. Don't get bogged down in the details. Don't answer questions that haven't been asked. Don't offer information that hasn't been requested. In the front room, keep up that communication with the back room, because that's where all the evidence comes from, and then present the evidence as it's produced by the back room. In the back room, anticipate the direction of the conversation. That's where these SMEs start to become really important. Start pulling that evidence from your system of record. Provide that evidence to the front room. Basically support the front room, make the front room look good. Okay, so let's keep this front room, back room structure in mind as we talk about documentation development. How does this approach serve TechCom as we begin to put together new form factors in our documentation? And how do we benefit from the tools that we use, such as Flare? Like I said, this is going to be less about how we use the tool and more about how the tool supports the process. And it's going to be a bit of a mini case study on how we created documents for an HTML version of one of our larger service manuals. And when I say large, I'm talking 3,000 pages plus. It was a very large manual. One of the things we're trying to do here is gather requirements from our users. And in most organizations, we would call this voice of the customer. And it can be difficult to do sometimes. In this case, the customer isn't the user. As writers of service and repair instructions, the customers are actually field service engineers doing repairs for the user in the field. They're internal customers. It can be the nature of our work that we sometimes end up a little isolated from the document that we create. Not isolated in that we don't understand the system, but isolated in that we're we're away from the way the document is used in the field. We can have access to the software builds, we can have access to the physical system in the lab, and even the SMEs, but how that doc is actually used in the field can be unclear to us. It can be nebulous, especially for medical devices. These systems are going to be in highly restricted sections of the facility. For security, yes, but also for infection control. You're going to have all kinds of, you're going to have all kinds of inoculations and vaccinations just to get back to where the system is being stored, much less used. And certainly you don't want to get in the way of the field service engineer actually doing the repair. They're mission critical to getting the system back up and running so that the therapy can get to the patient who is the individual that actually needs that therapy. So it's going to be really difficult for us to see how our document is used when a repair is happening in the field. Beyond providing safe and effective documentation, we actually have to ask those questions. How is the document going to be used? If it's on a laptop, what format does the field engineer use or want to use? Is it PDF? Is it HTML? Is it some other format? Are their hands dirty when they're flipping these pages? How do they even scroll a touch screen if they're wearing nitrile gloves? Can they even scroll a touch screen? And if they're old school, what if they printed the document? No one's going to print 3,000 pages, but they might print 50 pages for a procedure that they know they need. So what if they've got a printed document? Do they even have access to a network so they can access the document? These are all requirements that can be uncovered, and I would argue that they are more important than whether or not you're using gerunds as a heading or whether or not each step has an illustration associated. Beyond that, what about searchability? This is something that is really important, I think, to someone doing service and repair. Jargon words. Field engineers call things by different names from their engineering counterparts. If you've ever searched a large PDF for a word, you know you can be there for a while. It's linear, for one thing, and it's an exact string match. If you're looking for fasteners with an S and you only ever wrote fastener in your document, you're never going to get a match on that. You might hit next for the next 5 minutes and never find what you're looking for. So this meeting format that we're going to talk about, that we have talked about and that we're going to talk about for TechCom, it's an opportunity to get in front of stakeholders so that they can see what you're talking about and so that you can understand their needs and their concerns. As I said earlier, some of your stakeholders might be approvers on your engineering change order. So this is an opportunity to get them involved early. They're going to be having direct input on the requirements, and they're going to see how you're fulfilling those requirements. Prototyping a new system or a new look and feel of a document is so much easier than it used to be. Think about how with a 3D printer, I can have a widget in your hands this afternoon, right? Everyone can look at it, everyone can touch it. You can immediately see how it's going to fit into another system without investing the time to actually manufacture that part, which can be really, really, really expensive, right? Even one part is going to be more expensive than manufacturing 100 of them. When you're prototyping a new document layout, the technology that we work it's really no different. I can have a new layout in your hands this afternoon, and you can see how the document is going to work with any system without having to actually complete the manufacture of that document. I'm going to sound like a total fanboy here, and this is probably a good venue for that, but Flare is great for rapid prototyping. First off, you have a lot of built-in templates, so your dev time is going to be short, like this afternoon short. Sure, you're probably never going to use a template without making changes, but you also never have to start with a blank sheet of paper. You can find something, anything, that is close to what it is that you want with the number of templates that's included with Flare. And it gives you a ton of control over how much you build. Your builds can be really, really efficient, especially if they're HTML builds. And we'll talk about that here in just a minute. There's a constant tension between product development, engineering, and TechCom. So tell me if this sounds familiar to you. A product manager says something like, if you'll just give this to me in a Word document, I'll write it up, I'll say what it needs to say, and you can just publish that. And when you say you can't do that because of the tool that you're using, they blame the tool, and they blame you for the tool that you're using because they don't have it. Your work becomes about the tool that they're using, not about the value that you add. And make no mistake, TechCom is invaluable, especially in a medical device scenario. Documentation very often, almost always, is considered part of the device itself. So a poor quality there directly impacts the quality of the device itself. With a rapid prototype, what you're doing is you're putting the focus on the document. You're putting the focus on something that they can have in their hands that shows how the document is going to look and feel and work. As we run a meeting like this, where we're showing our prototypes, who are the players? Just like in an inspection, you really need to have someone in the lead. This is a single point of contact, and their job is to keep the meeting moving, dig deeper on questions that need attention, and direct everyone to places in the prototype where questions that they have already been answered. In the past, as a technical writing manager, I've been the one facilitating these meetings, or you can have a PM who's managing the project and is really in tune with your goals, your end goals for the product and for the project. You might want to have them facilitate. The facilitator's job is to demonstrate the prototype and tell the stakeholders what it is that they're seeing. Who are the stakeholders? Ideally, you have consumers of your documentation, so members of your user group. You might have trainers who leverage your doc in their own curriculum. And again, like I say, keep in mind that these stakeholders are also likely going to be approvers on any engineering change order. So you may want to have quality, again, big Q, and regulatory if they're going to be associated with the release of the document. I like to keep the stakeholder groups separate because different stakeholders are going to have different needs. Users very often want very different things from quality, and those needs may be in conflict with one another. You're going to resolve how to cater to those differing needs later, but you want to keep those groups separate so that you can get at this specific group's requirements and keep them meeting on point and keep it from devolving into some kind of conflict over those requirements of the different user groups. And when I say conflict, I just mean disagreement. I mean, obviously, we're not going to have, it's a professional conflict. It's not, fisticuffs over what font to use. I've never seen that. And then you're going to have a scribe, someone who's communicating with your backroom. So as a technical writing manager, I might also be the scribe while also facilitating. I know what the capabilities of the prototype are. So not only do I want to show off what it can do, what can be done, I also need to know, hey, tech writer in the backroom, if I want to search for a jargon word, what words can I use to demo that? It might be a word that someone has brought up during the course of conversation that the tech writer and I haven't, the backroom and I haven't agreed upon beforehand. So if there's another example, they can communicate that. I can ask them and they can communicate that. The scribe is the person communicating with the backroom. And just like during an inspection, it's letting the backroom know how it's going and where we might be going. In the backroom, I want someone who is really familiar with the document, probably an author, probably a Flare expert. Ideally, we're all Flare experts, but it doesn't always work out that way. There's always going to be folks who are stronger writers and folks who have a developer mindset and are stronger Flare experts. It's not an accusation, it's just reality. It would be nice to have both back there, but you want a document expert and a Flare expert. As you think about this, keep in mind, these are roles. They're not necessarily people. So as an example, in one meeting as a technical writing manager, I might be facilitating the meeting with a tech writer in the backroom directing me to the right answer. I might be facilitating this meeting because it's with quality and regulatory, and my job is to make sure that quality is satisfied. In another meeting, 30 minutes later, I might want the tech writer to facilitate because it's with users and because the tech writer is much more familiar with the content in the document and can more quickly demonstrate certain functionality that we know the users are going to be interested in. I'm a scribe at this point, recording additional requirements and only stepping in when necessary to talk about things. For instance, how we might be going about routing the document so that it's available to user. In this kind of meeting, we might have the PM in the backroom also providing information back to us about other requirements that have already been recorded and who was the stakeholder in that previous meeting who made that requirement known to us. You can see by these examples, the tech writer may not always be leading the meeting, but the tech writer is always an SME in the meeting. So let's apply this front room, back room philosophy to a requirements meeting. I want to set this up the same way I might set up an inspection. And this is the science. I want to have a front room. So this can be a literal or a virtual front room. There's no reason it has to be a literal front room. But I like to keep the stakeholders not only separate from themselves, different stakeholder groups separate from themselves, but also separate from the backroom folks. My main purpose here is that I want to keep the focus on me, the facilitator. Whether I'm a writer or a manager, I want the focus to be on me. I know where I want to go. I know how I want to direct the conversation. And more importantly, I want to answer the questions. I want to shape the discussion. It's not unreasonable to think that I might have a larger worldview with regard to how the documentation fits into our larger documentation set. Likewise, if I'm a lead on the document redesign, I might want to drill down on some specific functionality, and I might not want to get bogged down in questions of how does this fulfill some VP's goals. Either way, I want to shape the conversation. I want to be the single point of contact. I'll be running the demo, of course, pointing out features, and in later meetings, I'll be pointing out how we've addressed questions and needs from previous feedback. It almost makes us look clairvoyant, but it also allows us to keep the meeting moving and keep looking for additional feedback, not retread the same ground. The back room is feeding information to the front room. The back room is the reason we look clairvoyant. If you've limited how much of the project you're building, and you can run your builds fast, they may even be running builds on the fly to make updates during the meeting. I would say this requires a ton of coordination between the front room and the back room. I wouldn't suggest doing this if you and the Flare expert in the back room aren't really on the same page. I used to work with a Flare expert at my previous job. They were really in tune with what it is that we were doing with these meetings. And she would sometimes make these updates on the fly. And it was amazing. It was one of those things that was like, wow, I can't believe. She told me about it afterwards, like, dang, I can't believe that you did that. That was amazing. It was completely seamless. So it is possible. The art here is that we're addressing concerns of stakeholders during the meeting. We're moving past those concerns in the meeting, and we're addressing new concerns. We're constantly addressing new concerns. It almost becomes like a burn down list. Everyone brings their concerns, we've addressed them, and we're going to the next thing that's important. You can actually cover a lot of ground in a very short amount of time. We recently did, or not recently, but we did a group of meetings like this where we did 5 meetings in 2 days. We covered a ton of ground. You need someone to facilitate this. That's really important. And this is part of the art of this. You want to slow the conversation down so that you can record everything, and you want to keep everyone on point. It's important to understand and acknowledge everyone's concerns. People want to be heard, but you want to keep it moving without getting out into the weeds. This is a strategy to address the stakeholders' needs. So what you want to avoid is that the stakeholders don't address the original issue and they settle for a good solution, or they settle for an adequate solution instead of a good solution. Here's a good example of what I'm talking about staying on point and only demonstrating what it is that you can deliver. We were doing a requirements meeting, and we were demonstrating the ability to present thumbnails of images that you would click on and display full resolution images. And we were doing this with circuit diagrams. So instead of acknowledging how cool it was that this was a good solution for displaying large detailed diagrams, one of the stakeholders brought up the question of intellectual property. And was this something that we could actually distribute? And the comments began to devolve into the accessibility of the document in the field. How are we limiting access? Can we create some sort of linking scheme so that it's pulling the images directly from the system of record and so forth? You have to let that play out just a little bit. You want to make sure that you understand their position. We said, these are good questions, and it's something that we've addressed in the past with a number of training and legal processes. I hear your concerns, and we can review what we did, but I'd really like to stay on point here. We have a limited amount of time together this morning, and I want to stick with the document. I'd like to keep the focus on the document. I'm happy to take this offline with you, or even schedule an additional meeting to discuss it. And that was it. They've been heard. Their concerns had been addressed, and we were able to move forward in just a couple of minutes. We did eventually schedule some additional time to talk about that, but it was talking about what we'd done in the past, not what we needed to do in the future. We addressed it. We had taken care of it. We thought about it, and we were able to stick with the focus on the document. It's important to set expectations, especially with stakeholders. This is a strategy for getting at needs and requirements. You're not generating a final document in these sessions, and that's important. You really need to set that expectation up front. The most common question we get from users is, when is this going to be available? When can we start using this? And from quality and regulatory, the very common question is this in the next release? If this is an improvement in usage or accessibility, users are going to want to start using it immediately. Quality, I think their most common concerns are who tested this, who signed off on this, and does it beat the standards of our quality manual? The answer to both user groups is we're working on implementing this. What you're seeing is a proof of concept. It's more than that, really, but you want to set the expectations. For users, we're trying to get at what they need. We want to release this as soon as possible, but quality, we want to make sure that before it's released, we clearly understand how it's going to be maintained and released according to our quality standards. This approach is a strategy, and if you're getting these questions, really, you're doing a great job, because that means that the design is good and people want it. Pre-planning. So you really want to coordinate with your backroom. You want to know when you're going to build. Most likely it's going to be between meetings, but it can, like I said, it can also be in the midst of the action. It can be in the middle of the meeting, so long as it doesn't collide with the demonstration. Make sure everyone is on the same page with what you're going to demo and what you want to demo, and don't try to show things that haven't been built yet. You don't want to show something, you don't want to promise something that you can't deliver on. You only want to show what it is that you can deliver on. I talked earlier about potentially limiting scope in your build. I talked about this document that was 3,000 plus pages. Even if you're just building HTML, a build like that's going to take potentially 5 to 8 minutes, maybe more. Consider pulling your content, some content out of the demo for the demo to speed it up. Flare is really good about this sort of thing. Just pull content out of the TOC. You're not deleting it. It's just not being built. And it's really going to speed up your build time. You could even consider conditionalizing it for the build. That might be a really good way to maintain the structure of your TOC, not interrupt that, but just take stuff out of the build. You really want to lean on the facilitator to keep people on point. These meetings can sometimes turn into complaining sessions, let's say, and that's fine. Sometimes folks they need to get that out of their system. But you can address these complaints by demonstrating in the prototype that these complaints are being addressed, that they're being heard and they're being addressed. And that brings the focus back. That brings the focus back to the document. It takes it off of you, it takes it off of the tool. And you want to be the point of contact, but you want the document to be the focus. You can do multiple meeting requirements or multiple requirements meetings. I said earlier we did 5 meetings in 2 days. It was a grueling 2 days, but we got a lot of information in a really short amount of time. And we went from gathering requirements to getting buy-in, which was really cool. You could almost see that light switch change in people, where they weren't talking about what they needed anymore. We were talking about how we were going to fulfill those requirements, and they were agreeing with it. It was wildly successful. This quote here in italics is from one of the field service engineers. I remember it very distinctly. They said, this is the most important advancement in our documentation that we could make. We want this. That is so satisfying to hear. And it was just a great success for us. Think about this as a mini agile approach. These are all sort of mini release candidates. On a previous slide, I did say, you're not releasing this, but it's also a bit more than that, because everything that you're doing is working towards that end. You're prototyping things that you can move forward with. You're prototyping things that that you can support, so that what they see, they're going to expect, and that they can expect that. In other words, don't overpromise and underdeliver. We're sitting in these meetings because we want to know what you want, and we want to be able to deliver on that, and just be honest about what you can do. I mean, it's not going to be a magical website. It's not going to be a magical document. It's not going to be able to anticipate what it is that the user wants to see when they hit next. But there are a lot of cool things that we can do, and you want to be able to show that off. You want to be able to show that value add that we talked about just a while ago. So this presentation was called The Art and Science of Rapid Prototyping. So let's get back to that. Let's just review. The art, this is a front room, back room approach that allows you to slow down the conversation. You want everyone to have a say, but that's only really valuable if you can record what it is that they're saying and address it in some way in the future. So you want to slow it down just a little bit so you can get that information, so you can record that information. Flare, on the other hand, really allows you to speed up your builds. You can reduce the amount of information that you're building, so that goes faster, and there's less opportunity for error. Because your builds are going faster, you can do more, sometimes on the fly, sometimes during meetings. Again, you want to make sure that you've got great coordination with your backroom to do that. But these builds, again, Flare can go so quickly with these builds. It can just be really miraculous how quickly you can do new builds. And the one last thing under the art, you really need those soft people skills. And these people skills, there's something that I lack to a certain extent. I'm not good at these things, but it's really the ability to talk to users and address their concerns in a way that diffuses conversations or confrontations and lets them feel heard, while at the same time getting to the things that they need in terms of the document. The science, this approach puts the focus on the document. You are demonstrating the document. You're demonstrating how the requirements are being fulfilled. You're building faster so you can address issues more quickly. You can address issues from the last meeting and the next meeting, so it almost becomes this burn down list. It's a burn down list of everybody's requirements, and you can address them really, really quickly. All right, well, that's my presentation. Thanks everyone so much for listening, for coming this morning. First day after the time change. If you made it on time, hand clap to you, because it was tough this morning after the time change. Thank you very much for coming. Thanks for your questions. And I think Mike has a couple of things that he wants to cover, and then we'll do some questions. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Mike for a moment. Mike, back to you, sir.
All right. Thank you, Ray. Now, just a couple of kind of marketing announcements. By simply attending the webinar, we always try to have a couple of back pocket benefits for you. There is word of some price increases coming in the new year. So just mention that you attended the Art and Science webinar, and you can actually lock in this year's pricing. That's kind of the November benefit they're running. And then after the lock-in, I believe we have one more slide here. Or no, perhaps that's the only deal in the back pocket this month. Oh, yes. So, and then they have announced Mad World for next year. Now we're going to start alternating. Last year was in Austin. This year is going to be back in San Diego. The Mad World at home went so well last year. We're going to do it again for those who prefer not to travel. So we're both going to have in-person Mad World in San Diego. We're going to run Mad World at home as remote distance learning. but there will be a discount on that for people who sign up before the end of the year. And there are many more details up on our website. I believe those are the two big marketing announcements. I believe there was a question that came in the Q&A window, Ray. So if you want, I can read it to you, or if you have your second monitor up, you can just go ahead and read that.
Yeah, I can see the question here. For UI prototypes, it can help to present a wireframe model, which is clearly not the final thing. Have you found a way to do that with prototype documents? So that's an interesting question. Yeah. With our documents, especially with documents that might be intended for use in a clinical setting, one of the things that we do is that one of the things that we used to do was that until it is released, it is actually part of the template that it says draft, and it says draft in kind of like a big way on it. The company that I worked for, they had these stickers that they would put on medical devices in labs that say, I think it says something like not for clinical use. So we created a graphic that replicated that sticker, and it was actually part of the template itself. You had to turn it off to publish it rather than turn it on for reviews and whatnot. So, that's one of the things that we did was just make sure that it was very clear that this was a draft, and in big obvious letters, in a format that everyone is used to seeing, so that it looked like that sticker. The other side of that really, though, is that you kind of do want it to look like what it is that you're going to produce. If they come to a requirements meeting and they see something that is not the company colors or not the company font, you're going to get bogged down in that. It's going to be, why doesn't this look like our documentation? Why doesn't this look like our website? What standards are you following? Who approved this? And that's not the point. The point is to demonstrate how you're going to, it's the same reason why we do a spell check on any document before it goes out for release, because misspelled words, people get bogged down in that. They start questioning you as the author. They start questioning you as a department rather than focusing on the document itself. So, my opinion has always been it should look like what you're going to deliver as much as possible with that draft stamp, so that everyone clearly understands that this is not a final product. I see a second question there. For prototyping, do you create multiple project templates? And also, let me pull that open just a little bit. Also, file templates. It's a good question. So ideally what you have is you have a standard, and that all documents of this type should look like that standard. So you're probably not going to be creating, at least in our world, we wouldn't be creating multiple project templates. You're gonna be using, you want it to, like I said, you want it to look like what it's going to be released as much as possible. Albert, did that answer your question? I'm not sure if that answered your question or not. The next, you can respond, and I'll get back to you there. Do you use Flare project linking to create and share common content? This is always or often present in your documents. If not, how do you handle this? Project linking is something that came about after we started doing this, I'll say. But yeah, ideally, the things that we would use for global project linking would be some of those templates, some of those page layouts, but also information like warnings and precautions. Those are going to be things that we would share oftentimes from product to product or from product family to product family. So those things are going to be in your global project linking, and there's no reason not to do that. You just want to be careful that you're not going upstream with that information into your global project. You want to make sure that you're segregating information appropriately so that you're not pushing untested information or draft information back up into something that might make it into a live document. So Rona says this process seems to be more about the delivery of the content, how it's structured, how it functions, what it looks like, and less about the content itself. How do you gather requirements for new and updated content itself? That's a good question. The way we gather requirements for that, at least in this environment, was what new functionality is occurring, or are we implementing? What new parts are we implementing? That's your scope. That may not be a very satisfying answer, but that's how we went about doing that. I mentioned that you might have a project manager associated with this project, and really, I really like, as a technical writing manager, I really want to have a project manager associated with my writing projects. It's my opinion that writers write and project managers manage projects. And while a project manager can write and a technical writer can be a PM, you don't want to divide that attention. I always wanted my writers, when I was a manager, to be focused on writing and developing content, and supporting the PM, who was the person who was driving forward that project. The PM is going to have that larger worldview on what needs to be released based on how the project is being updated. So I would always really lean on the PM to tell me what the scope was. And then as a technical writer, I would come back and say, okay, so you want these 10 things. Here's my estimate on how long it's going to take. What's in, what's out. It's up to you, project manager, to determine that and to communicate that to leadership. You know, we're only 5 people. We can only do so much. You have to decide what it is that we're going to do. Let's see, what else do we have here?
Well, just to back you up, kind of reading between the lines on Albert's question, and I have the luxury of seeing behind the curtain with hundreds of customers. I find that a lot of our customers who are only doing their own corporate branding tend to have a very limited number of projects, project templates, template files. Whereas we have some other customers who tend to do what's known as OEM, or white branding their product, where yes, they might produce that product, but it might get rebranded under 3 or 4 partner look and feel. In those scenarios, I see a lot more project linking or a lot more individual projects where we have multiple page layouts defined, multiple template pages defined. So I think a lot of it depends on an individual scenario. If you're doing that kind of white branding, you'll have a lot more templates. If you're only doing your own corporate branding, then you're much more likely to have just a single common set.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Mike. And I think that would be something that would probably be worked out before you got into the meeting, right?
Yeah. Yes.
You're not gonna be making those switches on the fly during a meeting like this. You're going to be having these requirements meetings, possibly with those third parties. So you're going to want to present it looking like how, you're going to present your document looking like how they want it to look like. But you're going to do that beforehand. So I think that's a good point. I think I'm less qualified to talk about that specifically right now. I know that there's a lot that you can do with the global project linking. CSS obviously, and those templates are very powerful tools to making your document look very different, presenting a very different look and feel from project to project. I would almost say, take something like this, and this is going to, I think, dovetail nicely with the question that Dave asks next. I would almost pull all this stuff off into its own sandbox and work on this in a very isolated environment so that you can make those changes without inadvertently making changes to a live document. And that way you can move these CSSs around quite confidently that you're not going to impact something that you wouldn't necessarily want to impact in an adverse way. I do want to get to Dave's question. Dave Picard. Dave and I used to work together at a company a few years ago. So thanks, Dave, for joining in. His question is making changes on the fly. Is this just a prototyping context, or how did you manage changes from a version control point of view? That's a really good question. Version control here is, I think it's going to mean something a little bit different. Like these prototypes, they're probably never going to make it into your system of record. If you are using something like Subversion, SVN, or Git, something like that for your own team version control, again, I would pull this off into its own sandbox, label it requirements gathering, something like that, maintain it for a short amount of time, but make sure that it is not in the same repository, that it's not connected in some way to the truly version controlled documents that you need to release. This is a sandbox, so you want to keep those things separate from with version control. Looks like Kathy, do you utilize Contributor to gather SME feedback? What markup process? Sorry, let me just pull this window open just a little bit. What markup process works best for you? So we don't use Contributor. The places that I've worked where we've used Flare, it's been Flare only. We haven't used the Contributor functionality there. Sometimes we'll send documents out. If it's a paper-based document, we'll send out individual procedures for markup. We'll do PDF shared reviews, things like that. In a situation like this, it's a little bit harder to do because HTML is that page, it's that rendered web page. So it can be difficult to do something like that because it is a bit more interactive, and that's why I think this sort of thing is really useful. This sort of meeting is really useful because you're getting in front of a lot of people in a really short amount of time, and having that scribe, having someone who is actually recording what's getting said, what these requirements are, it's just really valuable. You can also, I would say, schedule follow-up meetings like this to again demonstrate what it is that's been generated. But in terms of getting that feedback back, for a paper-based document especially, it's going to be like PDF review or some sort of paper-based review, something like that.
All right, it looks like we've caught up on the questions. If anybody has any additional questions, please go ahead and type those in. But I'll be honest, I won't cry if we end a minute or two early. I'm kind of famous for my webinars going over and the audience yells at me when that happens. Any final comments from you, Ray, while we see if any final questions come in?
I would say that, if you're going to take this approach, collaboration, the collaboration with your backroom, making sure that you are really in tune with everybody on the team that's doing this presentation is really in tune with what it is that you're trying to accomplish, that they're really in tune with what it is that you want to get out of each meeting, and we're working towards that. The worst thing would be for we talked about in the FDA inspection, you want to stay out of the weeds, you want to keep everybody on point. The worst thing would be for your own team to get into the weeds, so that that collaboration with your own team, just making sure everyone, like I said, is on the same page would be the thing that I would say if you want to do this. Maybe even do a couple of dry runs on this just to make sure that everyone understands what it is that we're trying to accomplish.
Awesome. I didn't see any more questions. A few thank yous popped in, but no more questions. So I think we're going to wrap this up about 4 minutes early. I do want to say thank you so much to Mr. Ray Davis. Another awesome presentation. Thank you everybody for attending. As I said earlier, this has been recorded. Everybody will be receiving a link to the recording in case you want to share it with colleagues or want to review it again later. But with that, thank you so much, everybody. Have a great rest of today and an even better rest of your week.
Thank you, everyone.